I remember the moment I knew I was going to die. It was midnight, or a little past, when I stumbled across the trail of blood smeared on the glass of the observation deck. The rain was battering against the thick windows, each drop a piercing needle against the silence. The thunderheads glowering above made the jungle's canopy ripple and warp under brief flashes of purple-black lightning. I pressed my forehead against the chilled glass and forced myself to be calm, tried to pretend this was all a nightmare, but I knew I was very much awake. The power had gone out hours before. The generator was failing. The radio was a mess of static, and something was down there amongst the trees, something alive, something that shouldn't exist. My name is Matthew Summers, and I'm stranded at Station 04, a solitary observation post meant for climate data, not for a showdown with a creature that feels less of this world and more a manifestation of something ancient, something profoundly evil. I can hear its movement now, the crack of a heavy branch, a chorus of inhuman voices, a fleeting silhouette darting through the thunder cracks. I realize I may not make it through the night, but I must record everything I see, because the world must know what I stumbled upon in the jungle, and what it might mean for us all. I still remember the exact moment I made the decision to take the assignment at Station 04. It was a desperate choice, fueled by a need to escape, to clear my head from months of crushing anxiety and grief. For almost 10 years, I had buried myself in data, charts, and satellite images at the Climate Research Institute in Seattle. The work was important, but monotonous. The world was changing faster than anyone cared to admit, and I was a small cog trying to measure its heartbeat. But it was the personal losses, the breakups, the friends I drifted from, and the growing hollow inside me that pushed me toward the wilderness. The forest felt like a sanctuary, a place untouched by the chaos of human lives. When the opportunity came for a short-term posting at Station 04, a remote observation point, nestled deep in the Cascade Range, I grabbed it with both hands. 3 weeks of silence and solitude sounded like a cure. I pictured long days walking beneath towering pines, evenings spent reading by lantern light, nights filled with the sounds of nature's lullaby. Maybe I thought I could find a piece of myself out there, but I was wrong. Station 04 was nothing like the cozy, isolated retreat I'd dreamed of. It was a weathered metal structure rising in a small clearing surrounded by dense woods, so thick sunlight barely touched the mossy floor. The tower housed a handful of aging sensors designed to monitor climate variables, temperature, humidity, soil moisture, little pieces of data transmitted to a distant lab. The nearest town was a 2-hour drive, and even then the roads were rough and winding, often blocked by fallen trees or landslides. Radio contact was spotty at best. The station's generator sputtered and groaned, often threatening to fail. The first day was almost serene. The air was crisp with pine and earth, filled with the subtle hum of insects and birdsong. I set up my equipment methodically, double-checking the instruments, logging the coordinates. I walked the perimeter of the clearing, soaking in the quiet majesty of the forest. The towering firs swayed gently, their branches whispering secrets to the wind. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in shifting beams, dappling the ground in warm patches. For a brief moment I felt at peace, but peace was fleeting. By the second evening the woods began to change. The lively chorus of birds fell eerily silent, and even the smallest creatures seemed to vanish. It was as if the forest itself had held its breath. Shadows stretched longer, twisting unnaturally with the dying light. I caught glimpses of movement at the edge of my visioned shapes slipping between trees, too fast to identify. The air grew thick, damp, and heavy with something intangible, an oppressive weight that pressed down on my chest. At night, strange phenomena intensified. I was roused from sleep by distant sounds, faint chanting, the low hum of voices in a language I couldn't place. The words were guttural, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. They seemed to come from beyond the ridge, where the thickest part of the forest swallowed the light. I stared out the window of the small cabin attached to the base of the tower, watching shadows dance in the darkness. The faint glow of phosphorescent fungi flickered like ghostly lanterns along the tree trunks. I told myself it was the wind, my imagination, the result of too many late nights alone. But the sensation of being watched grew with every passing day. Then came the carvings. On the third morning, I found them etched into the bark of several ancient fir trees bordering the clearing. Jagged lines and strange symbols circled the trunks in uneven rings, deep gouges that looked as if made by claws rather than tools. The patterns were complex, unintelligible. I tried to capture them on my camera, but the lens distorted the shapes oddly, as if refusing to fully reveal them. The more I stared, the more they seemed to pulse with some dark, lifelike runes charged with an ancient power. That's when I found the journal. It was half buried beneath a pile of leaves near a dried creek bed about a mile from the station. The leather cover was cracked and soaked, the pages yellowed and brittle. The handwriting inside was hurried, jagged, as if penned by a man in constant fear. The journal belonged to a ranger named Thomas Halloway, who had vanished from the forest nearly 5 years earlier. His entries chronicled a descent into terror, filled with notes on sightings of a shadow beast lurking in the woods and descriptions of a cult that gathered near the riverbank. Reading his words was like peering into a nightmare. He described midnight ceremonies beneath the new moon, figures in dark robes chanting strange incantations, altars adorned with bones and candles. His fear was palpable. He wrote of voices calling his name, whispers that followed him even in daylight, and a presence so dark it seemed to swallow the forest whole. The last entry was torn, the final words trailing off mid-sentence. "They're coming for me. I can hear the..." The journal vanished from the spot the very next morning. No trace remained where I'd left it. I searched frantically, convinced I had been dreaming, but it was gone. The forest was playing tricks, or maybe something worse was at work. My nights grew restless. The chanting returned, louder and closer. It wasn't just the voices now. There was a rhythm, footsteps padding softly on dry leaves, the scrape of something dragging across the dirt, the sudden snap of a branch nearby. My flashlight beam would catch glimpses of figures standing just beyond the tree line, their faces hidden beneath hoods, their eyes glinting in the dark. On one occasion I spotted a fire flickering through the trees, the glow illuminating faces contorted in ecstatic worship. I could hear their words now, a litany to some ancient god or demon. I couldn't make sense of the language, but the malice in their tone was unmistakable. Fear clenched my heart with icy fingers. I began to document everything, the carvings, the journal entries, the sounds. I recorded audio of the chanting, video of the empty clearing bathed in moonlight. Yet with every passing day, the forest seemed to close in tighter, its shadows growing deeper, its secrets darker. I was no longer an observer. I was part of the story, and the story was far from over. It was on the sixth night that everything changed. The forest around Station 04 had been holding its breath for days, as if the very earth itself was waiting for something to awaken. The air hung heavy and stagnant, thick with the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves. Not a single breeze stirred the thick canopy above, and even the usual nocturnal symphony of frogs, insects, and owls was swallowed by a profound silence. This was the kind of silence that presses against your skin and seeps into your bones. The kind of silence that whispers danger in a language only fear can understand. Sleep had become a stranger to me. Every time I closed my eyes, I was haunted by the echoing chants that seemed to rise from the depths of the forest, growing louder with every night. That guttural, rhythmic murmur clawed at my mind, making it impossible to ignore. I felt as if the forest itself was speaking in tongues, calling me closer to something I wasn't ready to face. I had tried to convince myself to stay put, that it was madness to follow those voices into the dark, that I was just an overworked man unraveling in isolation. But curiosity had a way of clawing past reason, that insatiable itch pushing me further every time I thought I'd had enough. So on that night, with my hands trembling and my heart pounding like a war drum, I grabbed my camera, my flashlight, and the battered journal, the only tangible link to whoever had come before me, and set out into the forest. I remember stepping off the porch and into the shadows, the cold night air biting at my face as I moved cautiously along the faint trail. The moon was obscured by heavy clouds, plunging the woods into near-complete darkness. My flashlight's beam was the only thing cutting through the blackness, illuminating the gnarled roots and thick underbrush that threatened to trip me at every step. The forest seemed alive in an unfamiliar way. Every snapped twig underfoot echoed like a gunshot. Branches scraped against my jacket and face as if trying to hold me back, and the silence felt like a living entity stalking me with unseen eyes. With each step I could feel the weight of the forest pressing closer, as if the trees themselves were leaning in to watch my every move. The chanting grew louder, a low, resonant drone that seemed to vibrate through my chest. It was both hypnotic and terrifying, a litany of guttural words in a language I didn't recognize. Sometimes the cadence would rise and fall like the swell of a tide. Other times it would break into frantic shouts that pierced the night air. I followed the sound with a mixture of dread and determination, pushing through dense thickets and tangled vines until I finally emerged into a clearing beside a slow, dark river. The water was still and cold, reflecting the pale, ghostly light of the obscured moon. A thin mist hovered above the surface, curling and swirling like restless spirits trapped between worlds. In the center of the clearing, a scene unfolded that I will never forget. A circle of figures stood in the shadows, robed in black garments that hung like funeral shrouds. Their faces were hidden beneath deep hoods, but I could see their eyes, glowing faintly with an unnatural light, reflecting the flickering flames of several torches planted around the clearing's edge. At the heart of the circle was an altar made from rough, ancient stones stacked haphazardly, but with deliberate purpose. It was covered in grotesque offerings, dried animal bones, wilted flowers, and what looked disturbingly like human teeth. The scent was sharp and sickly sweet, like burnt incense mixed with something far fouler. The chanting swelled into a fevered crescendo as a new figure emerged from the shadows. It was a creature, monstrous, inhuman, something that seemed to defy nature itself. Its form was towering and grotesque, limbs unnaturally long and twisted in ways no human body could survive. Its skin was an ashen gray, cracked and marred with dark, pulsing veins that glowed faintly with an eerie, sickly light. From its skull curved two sharp horns, twisted like ancient tree roots, and its eyes were twin coals of burning fire, piercing through the darkness with a malevolent intelligence. The cultists dropped to their knees, their voices rising in worshipful cries. The creature opened its gaping maw, revealing rows of jagged, razor-sharp teeth, and emitted a sound that was part roar, part whisper, a guttural, ancient noise that resonated deep in my bones, making my blood run cold. I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away, caught in the hypnotic horror of that moment. Then the creature turned its gaze toward me. I felt the air shift, heavy and suffocating, like a physical force pressing down on my chest. It was as if the forest itself was alive with its presence, bending reality around it. The creature's eyes locked onto mine, and I saw something in them, not just hunger, but a cruel, malevolent intelligence that chilled me to the core. Panic broke the trance. I turned and ran, stumbling through the underbrush, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. Behind me, the chanting turned to frantic screams, desperate and wild. The sound of pursuit was close now, the rustling of footsteps, the snapping of twigs, the heavy breathing of the unseen hunters. I didn't dare look back. My lungs burned as I sprinted blindly through the forest, fear driving me past exhaustion. Every shadow seemed to twist into some monstrous shape, every rustle a threat. Hours later, when the first pale light of dawn filtered through the trees, I finally reached Station 04. I slammed the door shut behind me, bolted it, and pressed my back to the cold metal, trying to slow the ragged gasps tearing from my throat. I was shaking uncontrollably. My hands fumbled as I tried to operate the radio, but only static answered me. The generator sputtered uncertainly, the station's only link to the outside world hanging by a thread. I realized then, in the quiet terror of that dawn, that I was no longer alone. I had stumbled into something far darker than I'd imagined. The creature was real. The cult was real, and they were hunting me. I sank to the floor, clutching the journal to my chest, the only proof that any of this was true. But even as exhaustion finally claimed me, I knew that the horrors of that night were only the beginning. The hours after my frantic escape from the clearing passed in a dizzying haze of terror and exhaustion. I barricaded myself inside Station 04, my hands trembling as I double-locked the door and shut every shutter I could find. But the thin walls, constructed mostly of old wood and rusted metal, offered little comfort against the malevolence lurking just beyond. I could still feel it. That oppressive presence, a cold weight pressing against the building, seeping through every crack and crevice. Outside, the forest seemed to hold its breath, eerily quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves or distant, unnatural howl that pierced the night. Each sound sent a jolt of panic through me, my nerves raw and frayed from lack of sleep and the ceaseless fear gnawing at my mind. I tried to convince myself I was safe inside, but the memory of those glowing, burning eyes haunted me relentlessly. The demon wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was real, and it was hunting me. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, the chanting echoed behind my eyelids, a sinister lullaby that twisted into screams and roars. I could feel the cultists' twisted devotion, their cold, worshipful stares burning through the darkness like knives. As dawn crept over the horizon, I sank to the cold floor, clutching the journal tightly to my chest. It was the only piece of the puzzle I had, the only link to the man who'd been here before me, and perhaps the key to understanding what I was dealing with. I opened the journal again, flipping through the brittle pages carefully. The handwriting was uneven, smeared with ink and streaked with dirt, as if the writer had scribbled his thoughts in terror and haste. The early entries were mundane, observations of the forest, notes about the wildlife, even some sketches of plants and terrain. But as I turned the pages, the tone darkened. The writer's words grew frantic, his handwriting jagged and desperate. He spoke of strange figures seen just beyond the tree line, shadows moving unnaturally in the corner of his vision, whispers in an ancient tongue drifting on the wind, a language lost to time but filled with menace. He described hearing chanting at night, low, guttural, almost hypnotic, rising from some hidden clearing deep in the woods. Then he wrote of the cult, a secret group devoted to a dark, ancient entity, a demon summoned long ago by settlers who disappeared mysteriously. The cultists performed rituals to bind the demon, feeding it with sacrifices and blood offerings, seeking power and protection in return. The man's last entries were chilling warnings, urging anyone who found the journal to flee immediately before the forest claimed them as it had him. Reading those words sent an icy shiver down my spine. I wasn't the first to stumble into this nightmare. Others had come here before me, and none had escaped unscathed. That night, driven by a mixture of terror and a desperate need to understand, I forced myself to leave the supposed safety of Station 04. I couldn't stay locked away, not knowing what was coming, not without trying to find a way out or a way to fight. I moved cautiously, sticking to the river bank where the ground was firmer and the moonlight, though dim, helped guide my path. The forest around me was darker than ever, the shadows longer and more threatening. Every snap of a twig beneath my boots sounded like a gunshot in the silent night. The chanting began again, distant but unmistakable, a low, rhythmic drone that seemed to vibrate through the air itself, sinking into my bones. It felt like the heartbeat of the forest, steady and menacing. I crept closer, slipping behind a thick oak tree at the edge of a clearing. My breath caught as I saw them again, the cultists. There were more than the night before, cloaked in ragged black robes, faces hidden beneath deep hoods or strange masks carved from bone and wood. They formed a wider circle this time, standing shoulder to shoulder, their voices rising and falling in a hypnotic chorus. Flickering torches blazed around the perimeter, casting grotesque, dancing shadows that twisted across the gnarled roots and twisted trunks. The altar at the center was even more grotesque than I remembered. Stones stained dark with age and blood formed a crude pyramid, piled high with fresh offerings, animal carcasses gutted and draped over the rocks, dried bones scattered like sinister confetti, and symbols drawn in thick, black liquid that smelled like burnt sulfur and rot. And at the center, the demon appeared again. It moved with a terrifying grace, limbs gliding silently over the earth, long fingers curling like talons. Its skin was the color of ash, cracked and veined with glowing dark lines pulsing faintly with a sickly light. Its eyes burned with fiery hatred, and its twisted horns scraped the low branches as it shifted. I realized the cultists weren't just worshipping the creature, they were feeding it. offering up sacrifices, blood, and dark devotion in exchange for unholy power. The air was thick with an almost tangible hunger, like the forest itself was drinking in the ritual. The chanting rose to a fevered pitch, a primal sound that echoed from the depths of time itself. The creature raised its massive head and unleashed a roar, a sound that was half a scream, half a whisper, reverberating through the clearing and shaking the very ground beneath me. The cultists dropped to their knees, faces raised in worship and fear, voices trembling with reverence. Then they began to chant a new incantation, a language so old and alien it twisted my tongue just to hear it. The ground beneath the altar trembled, and the trees groaned as if waking from a long slumber. A cold wind swept through the clearing, carrying the stench of death and decay. I could feel the air thicken, charged with something dark and ancient, something hungry and alive. Heart pounding, I slipped back into the shadows, my breath shallow and ragged. I didn't dare risk being seen, knowing the cultists could kill me on a whim if I was caught. But as I moved away, the forest seemed to close in, the paths twisting and turning as if alive, intent on trapping me in this nightmare. Panic surged as I realized I was hopelessly lost, every familiar tree looking like a stranger, every shadow a potential threat. When I finally stumbled back to the station, my hands were bleeding from thorns and scrapes, and my mind was racing with dark thoughts. In the journal, I found references to an ancient text, a book said to contain secrets about the demon's origins and how to banish it. According to the writings, it was hidden in an abandoned cabin deep in the forest, a place avoided even by the cultists. For the first time since arriving here, a flicker of hope lit within me. If I could find that book, if I could learn how to fight this darkness, maybe I could survive. Maybe I could end this nightmare. But the forest was closing in fast. That night I heard the cultists moving closer, their chanting drifting like a poison through the trees. And in the distance the demon's eyes burned like twin hellfires, watching, waiting. I am trapped, I am hunted, and I don't know if I'll ever escape. The forest's oppressive silence greets me as I step out from the fragile safety of Station 04. Dawn barely filters through the dense canopy, casting a pale, ghostly light on the tangled undergrowth. The air hangs heavy and damp, saturated with the scent of wet earth, decaying leaves, and something fouler, a metallic tang, faint but unmistakable. Each breath I take feels thick, like swallowing smoke or ash, clogging my lungs with unease. In one hand, I clutch the battered journal, my only link to the man who came before me, the only thread guiding me through this nightmare. In the other, a rough spear I fashioned from a broken branch, sharpened crudely at the tip, but held tightly as a fragile weapon against the unknown. My heart pounds unevenly, a frantic drumbeat echoing in my ears, and my senses stretch taut, alert to every sound, every movement. The forest is alive, but not with the usual symphony of birdsong and rustling leaves. Here the shadows move with purpose. The very air hums with a slow, unnatural pulse, like a heartbeat too deep and ancient to be human. Fear and desperation both drive me forward, compelling me to uncover whatever secrets hide beyond these trees. The journal's last note spoke of an ancient cabin, a place forgotten by time and shunned even by the cultists. It lies where the old paths cross the forgotten creek. The writer had scrawled hurriedly, but those words offer little comfort or clarity. The forest is a maze of wild growth and twisting trails. I've seen nothing but endless trees and winding streams since I arrived. Hours pass beneath the choked canopy. The sun climbs higher, but its light barely penetrates the thick veil of branches, leaving the woods dim and suffocating. I stumble over gnarled roots and tangled underbrush, each step heavier than the last as exhaustion seeps into my bones. The chanting that once echoed faintly in the distance has all but vanished, replaced by a pressing silence that presses down like a suffocating shroud. And then, almost imperceptibly, I find it. A narrow, overgrown path. It's little more than a faint scar through the wilderness, hidden beneath thorny brambles and thick moss. The earth here is compacted and worn, a testament to footsteps long gone but not forgotten. The trail winds down into a ravine where a cold, sluggish creek murmurs through moss-covered stones. And there, half swallowed by ivy and fallen leaves, stands the cabin. It is a ruin, more shadow than structure. The wood is warped and blackened by rot, the roof sagging in broken, uneven sections. The windows are shattered, their jagged edges catching the scant light like the teeth of some long-dead beast. The door hangs askew, groaning softly with each whisper of wind. I hesitate at the threshold, heart hammering, breath catching in my throat. The air inside is stale and sour, thick with the scent of mold, decay, and secrets best left undisturbed. I step inside cautiously, the floorboards creaking mournfully beneath my weight. The interior is a graveyard of forgotten lives. Dust hangs thick in the air, disturbed only by motes that dance lazily in the pale light filtering through the shattered windows. Broken furniture lies strewn across the floor, splintered and coated with years of grime. Faded photographs, their faces blurred by time, litter the cracked walls, memories lost to the void. I begin my desperate search, rifling through stacks of brittle papers and cracked, leather-bound books. My fingers tremble as I leaf through documents written in languages both familiar and arcane. Journals, ritual notes, scraps of correspondence hinting at the cult's long and dark history. Time slips away unnoticed as I delve deeper into the cabin's haunted past. Then finally I find it. A heavy tome bound in cracked leather and sealed with a rusted clasp. Strange symbols writhe and twist across its cover, etched deep as if alive beneath my gaze. My hands shake violently as I break the seal and open the book. Its pages are filled with eldritch writing, diagrams of unholy sigils, incantations in forgotten tongues, and chilling descriptions of the demons' summoning and worship. The text speaks of an ancient entity bound to this land, a creature born from human sin and sacrifice, its essence fused with the twisted forest. The cultists had summoned it centuries ago, chaining it with dark blood magic and feeding it with offerings of flesh and fear. They had built their rituals around it, worshipping the demon for power and protection, paying a terrible price that has echoed through generations. There are instructions here, rituals of banishment and binding. But the cost is great. The ritual demands rare ingredients, arcane symbols drawn in blood, and a sacrifice of one's own soul and will. As I read, a cold dread creeps over me. I'm not alone. The cabin door slams shut with a sudden crash, the sound echoing through the empty space like a death knell. The temperature plummets. My breath fogs in the chill air. A low, guttural growl vibrates through the walls, shaking the very floor beneath me. Outside, the cultists' chanting rises again, closer this time, their voices a dark chorus encircling the cabin like wolves closing in on prey. The forest itself seems to lean in, shadows deepening and twisting, reaching like hands eager to snatch me into the void. I am trapped. The book clutched tightly in my hands, the weight of the forest's dark secrets pressing down on me. I face the night alone. The demon's glowing eyes burn through the window panes, a constant reminder that I am hunted, that my time here is running out. And still, somewhere deep inside, a flicker of defiant hope burns. If I can learn the ritual, gather the ingredients, and summon the courage, perhaps I can fight. Perhaps I can end this nightmare. But the forest is patient, and it does not forgive. The instant the cabin door slammed shut behind me, the fragile barrier I'd hoped to find between myself and the outside world shattered like glass. A suffocating silence fell over the room, thick and heavy, as if the air itself had turned viscous. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on my chest, stealing the breath from my lungs. The stale, musty scent of old wood and rot mingled with something far more sinister, a coppery tang that reminded me of fresh blood and ancient decay. Outside, the cult's chanting rose like a storm, a low, guttural incantation that vibrated through the cabin's warped walls and seeped into the very floor beneath my feet. Their voices formed a haunting rhythm, uneasy, savage, like the heartbeat of something monstrous lurking just beyond the trees. The sound wrapped itself around the cabin like a living thing, tightening with every passing second. The temperature plunged sharply. My breath escaped invisible clouds as a cold breeze snuck through the broken windows and cracked doorframe, swirling dust and dead leaves across the floor. I could hear the groan of the cabin settling, wood creaking and sighing. Like a wounded beast, shadows gathered and flickered, leaping across the walls as the fading daylight died completely. Clutching the ancient tome to my chest like a lifeline, I sank down against the nearest wall. My hands trembled so violently that the book nearly slipped from my grasp. My heart hammered wildly, a frantic drumbeat that seemed to echo in my skull. I tried to steady my breathing, inhaling slow and shallow, but panic lurked just beneath the surface, threatening to engulf me. The book was my only hope, the key to survival in this nightmare. It promised answers, instructions, a way to fight back, but as I flipped through its yellowed, brittle pages, the words seemed to crawl and shift before my eyes, written in twisted script and arcane, symbols that felt alive with dark intent. The ritual described was terrifying in its demands. I would need the blood of the black dog, a creature whispered about in half-forgotten legends, bound to this land and the demon itself. Sacred herbs whose names I couldn't pronounce, set to grow only near a cursed creek deep in the forest. Salt and ash to mark protective circles. And then, the most harrowing, a sacrifice. The ritual demanded a willing offering, one's own soul, the surrender of free will. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Could I do it? Could I give a part of myself to fight this evil? The cabin groaned and shuddered as a sudden gust swept through, rattling the broken window panes and scattering loose papers. Shadows seemed to lengthen, writhing and twisting like living serpents. The demon's presence pressed in, almost tangible, a suffocating weight just beyond perception, watching, waiting. Outside, the cult's chanting surged, raw and desperate, growing louder and more frenzied with every moment. The forest itself seemed to lean in closer, the trees creaking and groaning as if straining to hear. I tore through the cabin's debris, desperate for the ritual's ingredients. The cracked jar of salt and ash was easy to find near the hearth. A few dried herbs lay scattered across a battered shelf. But the black dog's blood, that was a mystery. The journal had hinted at the creature, describing it as a spectral guardian stalking the forest's edge, a dark sentinel tied to the demon's power. If it was real, and if I could find it, maybe I could compel it to help me, or at least survive its wrath. Time slipped away like smoke through my fingers. With shaking hands, I cleared the cabin's center and began mixing salt and ash, drawing the ritual circle on the floor with painstaking care. The powder shimmered faintly in the dim moonlight, filtering through the shattered windows, the edges rough but deliberate. Every sound made my skin crawl, the scraping of a branch against the cabin wall, the faint rustle of leaves, a distant, mournful howl that echoed like a dirge. Fear clawed at my mind, trying to unravel my resolve. Then, from the shadowed edge of the clearing, a low growl answered the cult's chant, slow, mournful, and impossibly ancient. The black dog emerged. From the darkness, a ghost-like figure gliding silently across the underbrush. Its fur was slick and black as spilled ink, shimmering faintly under the pale moonlight. Its eyes glowed with an eerie, otherworldly light, ancient, knowing, and unreadable. It moved with a fluid grace, every step measured and purposeful, as though it belonged both to this world and another. Dot, it fixed its gaze on me, the intensity almost unbearable. I felt as if it was peering directly into my soul, weighing my worth. I swallowed hard, spear ready, torn between fear and fascination. Was this creature a protector, or another weapon of the demon's curse? The tome's pages rustled in my hands as I frantically searched for words to bind this guardian to my will. A desperate act of control in a world spiraling beyond reason. The cultists were almost upon the cabin now, their voices ragged with fury and madness, a pack closing in on fresh prey. The flicker of their torches cast grotesque shadows through the broken windows. There was no turning back. I had to face whatever came next. The black dog held my gaze for what felt like an eternity, its piercing, luminescent yellow eyes glowering quietly in the dimly shifting half-light. There was something unfathomable within those orbs, something ancient and eternal. I was not looking into the eyes of a mere creature. I was staring directly into something elemental, something forged from shadow, from nightmare, from the earliest stories that mankind whispered to keep its children from straying into the dark. I slowly lowered the spear, reluctantly trusting. A creature I barely comprehended. Instinct told me this was not a moment for aggression, but for a desperate alliance. The tome I pressed against my chest seemed to pulse alongside my own heartbeat, a rhythmic affirmation, a sinister form of understanding. The thick leather cover grew warm under my grip, and I felt its magic seep up through my fingertips, spreading a strange fire through my veins. The black dog paused just a few paces away, its body perfectly poised, a creature made for danger, for death, yet it chose not to attack me. Instead, it dipped its massive head in a gesture that seemed reverent. I held my breath as I whispered the ancient words I had found within the tome, words I barely knew how to pronounce, much less comprehend. The language tasted like ashes and thunder, a chorus of syllables that seemed to warp and twist reality itself. The moment the last word fell from my lips, a rush of freezing air filled the cabin. The flames in the nearby fire pit were snuffed out in an instant, and a sinister silence fell, a silence made up not of peace, but of oppressive danger. The black dog stepped forward and placed a single massive paw within the circle I had carefully constructed from a mixture of bone ash, dried herbs, and coarse sea salt. The circle glowed faintly, a shimmering barrier that seemed to pulse in time with both its heartbeat and mine. Outside, the cult's chant grew to a frenzied roar. The voices were raw, mad, filled with a chaos that made my skin prickle. The forest itself seemed to warp under their magic, the branches bending inward and upward, the roots creeping just a bit farther toward the cabin's foundation. I could feel their magic growing, a pressure that pressed against me, a growing chaos that challenged my very understanding of reality. The black dog raised its head, letting out a piercing, soul-shaking howl, a call that seemed to ripple through the heavens and down into the earth. The cultists fell momentarily silent, their chant faltering under the weight of that ancient voice. The creature's eyes glowed brilliantly, two piercing orbs of gold and orange, a fire forged in a world without light. The tome fell from my grip, its pages turning on their own, until they opened to a passage I hadn't noticed before. A passage describing the ritual of binding. The price for employing this magic was not small. It demanded something profoundly intimate, a piece of my own soul. I pressed a shaky finger to my sternum, closing my eyes as I whispered, "I submit. I pay whatever price is due." A searing agony exploded in my chest, a feeling as if something were tearing away a piece of me, a piece I would soon realize I could never get back. The black dog drew in a deep breath, then exhaled a shimmering black mist that flowed directly toward me. The mist enveloped me, entering through my mouth, my nose, and even my pores, tying me to its fate in a way I could not sever. The cultists screamed, a chorus of disbelief and rage, as an invisible force hurled them backwards. Some fell to the ground, clawing at their own flesh, while others turned and tried to flee into the trees, only to be overtaken by something that darted from shadow to shadow, something I couldn't see directly, something that kept the cult from escaping its wrath. The cabin began to warp under the pressure. The wooden beams groaned, the windows shattered, the very earth trembled. I fell to my knees, blinded by a riotous rush of magic. The black dog pressed its massive forehead against mine, delivering a rush of warmth, a fleeting moment of peace, amid chaos, and then it drew back, reluctantly, a creature bound by fate alongside me as the first rays of dawn fell through the broken windows, casting long, shimmering rays of gold upon the ashes. I opened my eyes. I was alive, but I was not the person I had been. The binding had forged a permanent link between me and the creature, a link forged in tragedy, magic, and fate. The cult's threat had been turned back, but I knew the nightmare was far from over. I had made a deal I could not undo, a deal that would follow me for the rest of my days, a curse I would carry within me, a curse that meant I would forever walk the path between worlds. The first rays of dawn glimmered faintly through the shattered windows, casting gold-dappled patterns across the wooden floorboards, and the ashes that fell from the ceiling with every weak tremor. The silence that fell after the chaos was oppressive. Heavy, a silence that seemed filled with the ghosts of those who had perished in the conflict, with promises made, promises kept, promises I hadn't yet come to comprehend. The world felt raw and wounded, a place rendered vulnerable by what had gone before, by what I had opened up, by what I had become. I knelt there, weak, wounded, a piercing agony, gnawing at my side where a cultist's blade had opened me up. The black dog remained at my side, its massive form coiled protectively alongside me, its piercing yellow-orange eyes glowering into the growing light. I placed a shaky hand upon its thick midnight black fur, a silent affirmation, a vow made. Without words, I would see this through, whatever it meant. Somehow I found the strength to stagger to my feet. The cabin was a mess, its furniture shattered, its windows gone, its walls barely holding together, but I knew I couldn't linger there much longer. The cult might be gone, its members defeated or driven away, but its magic was not. I could feel its poison spreading through the forest, through the land itself, a manifestation of the curse I had become a host for, a curse that might follow me for the rest of my days. The magic was alive, growing, seeping into every root and vine, extending its reach far beyond the borders of this forsaken clearing. Walking forward, I retrieved the tome from the floor. The ancient book glowed faintly under my grip, its rune-covered pages slowly turning in a phantom breeze, until it fell upon a passage I hadn't noticed before, a section describing the eternal bond forged by the binding ritual. According to the tome, I was now bound to the creature, connected by magic, by fate, by the curse itself. We would feel each other's struggles, each other's pains, until death, or until the curse was severed by a rite so perilous that few ever lived. To perform it, the tome's ink glimmered gold as I turned the fragile parchment, a manifestation of knowledge that seemed alive, a magic I couldn't pretend I hadn't become a creature of. The black dog fell into step beside me as I stumbled toward the cabin's entrance. I pressed my wounded side against the wooden frame for support, reluctantly forcing myself forward. The moment I crossed the threshold, a rush of icy wind swept through the clearing, tugging at my clothing and piercing my flesh. The trees whispered their disquiet, their branches clicking together in a chorus of bone-dry voices. The cult's magic was still alive, spreading its reach far and wide, a poison slowly infecting everything it touched. I turned back just once, casting a fleeting glance at the ruins. The black pool that had opened up in the center of the cabin, a manifestation of something ancient and awful, glimmered faintly in the growing light. From its depth, a colossal shadow stirred, a silhouette I hoped I would never see in its entirety. The creature's form seemed to warp and fold in upon itself, a manifestation of eternal chaos, a chaos that made my knees tremble and my pulse falter. The black dog pressed against me, anchoring me, keeping me from falling into oblivion. I drew a shaky breath, tasted ashes on my lips, and forced myself forward, away from danger, toward a future I could not yet see, toward a fate I could not yet comprehend. Step by step, I made my way back through the forest, following a path forged by magic and fate. The cult's chant, which had previously filled the air, was gone. The only sound was the chorus of birds beginning their dawn songs, a deceptive calm, a moment's peace before whatever was to come. I knew I was not free. I knew the curse I carried would follow me for the rest of my days. The black dog, bound to me, would remain by my side, a silent guardian and eternal reminder of the price I had paid. The cult might be defeated today, but its magic, its wrath, its reach, those were not gone. They would manifest again, somewhere down the path of fate, when I was least expecting it, a fate I was powerless to avoid. I turned my face toward the growing light, toward the future I would step into, wounded, marked, but alive. The black dog fell into stride alongside me, its piercing gaze vigilant, a creature forged by nightmare but bound by loyalty. Whatever came, I would face it, not as a victim, but as someone forged by fire, forged by tragedy, forged by the knowledge that I had crossed a boundary I could not undo. And then, just when I thought I was stranded, a clearing opened up in the trees, a break in the oppressive jungle, a path that led toward the nearby highway, toward a small town, toward safety. I stumbled forward, following that path, until I saw a solitary truck pass by in the distance. I rushed toward it, frantically signaling with my injured arm, until the driver noticed me and slowly came to a halt. I fell into the passenger seat, closing the heavy metal door with a shaky grip. As we drove away, I turned to look back through the rearview mirror. The black silhouette of the creature was still there, sitting at the clearing's edge, its piercing yellow-orange eyes glowering from the shadows, a permanent reminder that I may have gotten away today, but I will carry this curse with me for the rest of my life. I may be alive, but I will be haunted, a man marked by something that I can't erase, something I can't destroy, something that will follow me wherever I go. I turned back toward the rearview mirror just once more, letting that piercing yellow-orange gaze fade into the growing light of day. I knew I couldn't destroy the curse. I couldn't erase the horrors I had stumbled into, the horrors that dwell just beyond the thinning barrier between worlds, but I could do something else. I could make sure that whatever tried to break through stayed where it belonged. I could become a guardian, a solitary warden, a barrier between the nightmare and the unwitting lives I'd sworn to protect. So I made a choice. I turned back up that dirt path, back toward the observation station I had stumbled upon, back toward the clearing that held the creature's pool of chaos, back toward the place I was meant to be. I made it my refuge, my stronghold, a solitary outpost from which I would watch and wait. Here I would track their movements, learn their patterns, document their horrors, and do whatever I could to keep them from spreading. I may be bound by the curse, but I chose to become its jailer, its guardian, its last barrier. I am not a victim. I am a sentinel. I am a wall forged by tragedy and forged by resolve. I will stand firm against whatever comes, because the moment I falter, something much greater, much darker, may break free. So I remain, not for myself, but for everyone else, for those who can't see what I see, for those whose nights I aim to keep restful and free from danger. The darkest hours produce the brightest guardians. I whispered to myself as I turned away from the clearing, shouldered my pack, and began my first patrol. The black dog fell into step alongside me, a silent, eternal counterpart, and together we slipped back into the shadows, two creatures forged by nightmare, protecting a world that would hopefully remain obliviously safe.